I remember the major dichotomy that I faced in my life, which I'm sure you do too, is my weekends and my weekdays were very different. I'm talking about 12 years ago in the initial part of my career. My weekends used to be president of Toastmasters, giving speeches, getting applause, standing ovations, ribbons, and trophies, going to demo meetings, speaking to people even older to me, more experienced than me, getting their, you know, all their praises. And Monday morning, I would go back to my IT company. I used to be what my B school professor later said, Aditya, you're the golden quadrilateral. I said, what do you mean, sir? He said, that's Indian IT male engineer. Indian IT male engineer. You're a golden quadrilateral, Aditya. Should I be proud of that? He said, that's your choice, but you're golden quadrilateral. So, so I, so I, at that point in time in 2008 and 9, I was feeling this constant dichotomy. On one Monday morning, I had to go back to Cognizant. I was working in Cognizant to a coding job. I wasn't even good in coding. I mean, so I wasn't even passionate about it. I would never get the best coder award for sure, even in Cognizant. But that it was my job. And weekends were so different. I loved my experience in Toastmasters. I was around the time I got an opportunity to work with Rotary, work with TEDx. But my weekdays was back to, it was just so different, as if I was living two different lives. Have you felt that? I'm sure a lot of you are feeling that now, aren't you? Because most of the emails and calls that I receive these days from Toastmasters, especially, is exactly about that. Aditya, I just feel so much myself when I'm on stage, when I'm doing this. But my profession is not deriving much of that from me. How do I bridge this gap? How do I remove this dichotomy? How do I live a life which is more non-contradictory, which is more swadharmic, which is myself? I faced that a lot till a point where I couldn't sleep well because I so wanted to do more of what I did in the weekend and so wanted to do less of what I did in the weekend. But what do I do? Indian IT male engineer. Don't have too many options, do I? So the skills I learned in Toastmasters helped me again. I wrote a mail, and I'm not advising this to any of you, so don't quote me on this, but I wrote an email to the president of Cognizant Technology Solutions. There's already a 1.2 lakh company then. I wrote a mail to the president saying, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm doing now. How do I bridge this gap? I would love to contribute more. At that point, I realized, friends, that people at the very bottom of the pyramid in an organization and at the very top are wonderful people. It's these mid managers who think they are senior management and limit your opportunities. If you are a mid manager, you may be doing that too. So the president of Cognizant replied to me within 2 hours saying, Aditya, I appreciate that you've reached out to me. Why don't you come meet me? I work in this branch of Cognizant. I was like, ooh, wow. So I went and met her without my manager's knowledge. And she said, tell me, Aditya, what are you talking about? And I said, ma'am, I took my DTM plaque, I remember, to her because I just complete. I said, man, this is all that I've done. This is what I'm doing, but I just don't feel that I'm contributing enough to Cognizant. And so she just typed an email to the person who reported to her, who was heading the strategic marketing group at Cognizant. She said, here's this bright young talent. He seems to be really confident, talking well. He knows what he wants. Why don't you check him out? Then I told, ma'am, but I haven't told my manager that I sent this mail. She said, what? So then she said, okay, I'll take care of that. You go meet him. He's right here in the next room. So I met that guy. He said, Aditya, we hire only MBAs for strategic marketing. You're a non-MBA, but this lady, this president has recommended you. So I'm going to put you through the same rounds of interview that we would put a freshly minted MBA. Now, if you do well, I'm okay to take you to our group, even though you don't have an MBA. But if you don't do well, don't go back to her and complain that you like speaking, blah blah blah. You go back to coding. Is that a game? Are you game for that? I said, okay, I'm game for that. But can I tell my manager first? He said, yeah, That's fine. You, you come back next week and we will have those interviews. So that's where my Toastmaster skills came in. I was put through 3 rounds of interviews. Of course, I read up on strategy and marketing, but what got me into that group was my skills at Toastmasters. You see, the beauty about the skills learned in Toastmasters is that you don't see difference in 2 days. You don't see difference in 5 days. It's like looking at the mirror. You look at the mirror every day. Do you ever realize that you've grown up? No. You look the same to you because you look at it too often. Somebody else seeing you after 2 years may tell you, oh, you seem so different than what you were 2 years ago. And that's how your skills at Toastmasters come out. You don't realize that you've become a better speaker, you speak the same, but somebody else can make the difference and you differentiate yourself from your peers pretty well. So then I got into the strategic marketing group. And then life was so much better. I felt that the dichotomy was starting to reduce a bit. But then I hit the glass ceiling there because you know you got to have the MBA lingo and jingo to survive. And that's where I took a break, went to ISB, did my MBA. And even in my ISB admission process, Toastmasters helped. Not the fact that I am Toastmaster. That's a mistake we all do. A quick pro tip for you. Don't use Toastmasters in your resume to sell yourself. It's very tricky. See, if you're a national swimming champion in an interview, I can't ask you to swim and show me, can I? So I have to believe what you put in your resume. But if I see you claiming to be an amazing public speaker, it comes across in for display in front of me. And if I see you as an average speaker in front of me, but you're calling Toastmasters in your resume, it doesn't sell much. So the fact that you're a Toastmaster needs to come out in in the conduct of your display, rather than the display of your conduct. So and got into ISB. Then that was another big choice I had to make. I got on campus. I was placed in a good job, uh, a kind of a product management kind of job. Great job, aspirational job. But then I had a choice to make. I know by this point in time, Toastmasters and my life had led me to a point where I was closer to living a non contradictory life. I was closer to moving towards my swadharma, which is my natural inclinations. What am I naturally good at? Can I do more of? Because I learned that in order to be a good leader, in order to be a good person, it's so much more easier if you operate in a field where you're naturally good at, where there is a calling for you naturally. You know, Sachin felt that at the age of 3 when he held the bat, that famous picture of Tendulkar. Federer, I'm sure, feels that each time he holds a tennis bat. It's not a chore, it's not a work. They would do that even if they were not paid. By chance, they became billionaires. So, similarly, each of us feel that energy at some vocation or some work in our lives, don't we? I felt that I was starting to feel that more and more in my life than I did in my IT job. So I didn't want to, I didn't want to, in harsh words, prostitute myself for good pay. So I said no to that job, and I graduated out of ISB jobless. I didn't have a job, and I had a loan of 18 lakhs at that time. It was still a very big amount, I'm sure even today, but I didn't have a job. The reason is during ISB, I realized that I had 3 areas of passion, what I call the 3 vertices of a triangle. You know, a triangle's vertex, 3 vertices. And I wanted to sit right inside that as a sweet spot. And I said, whatever job doesn't give me that, I'm not going to do that. Right? Arrogance of youth, I guess. Now I may, I may be different. The vertex one was how organizations made money, the flow of the dollar bill. I love that because I love learning that in my MBA. So I said, I want to work not just as a coach, or I want to work in the heart of business. Two, the second vertex was people. I've always been fascinated about the human mind, people, why some leaders lead better than other leaders. What is the resistance in our own personality that stops us, that makes it difficult for our own self to be the person we want to be? It's such a question, isn't it? We want to be a certain person, but we ourselves find it difficult to be that person. Well, if your mother wants you to be something and you do and you find it difficult, then it's okay. But you want to be disciplined, but still you aren't able to be disciplined. Now that's a paradox, isn't it? So I was fascinated about what about the human mind creates that resistance, what we call our own personality and temperaments, that's that stops us from being who we want to be. That's the second vertex. The third vertex was public speaking, of course, influencing in public speaking. So I was going and finding which profession would make me sit between business, leadership, and public speaking. And that's when one of my, long story short, I joined an organization that I thought was between these three vertices. And even after 8 years now, 8, 9 years now, 8 years, I still continue in the same organization in London now. But I do a lot of things outside of that. So around 20, 30% of work I do is outside of that organization too, in terms of public speaking and stuff. So that was another lesson that I learned. You are at your natural best when you find your swadharma, when you find your natural inclination. But you need to persevere and persist till you find a career or find a hobby that allows you to display that. It's very tempting. If I had taken that job on campus at ISB, nobody would have nobody would have blamed me, would they? They would have said, "Hey, you did the right job." But you need to persist. A gold cast video on Facebook of people rags to riches. It's not some other person's story. It can be your story. The only difference between their story on Gold Cast and yours is that you're too afraid to take those steps. But you can take those steps. But it's more difficult to take your step if you've already filled your life with too many burdens of 4 EMIs and 5 responsibilities. If you live life light, it's easier for you to have those strategic pivots in your life to change direction. The last point I want to say before we get into questions is um, is the fact that all of this is knowledge. All of what I said to you is just gossip. Information without transformation is just gossip, isn't it? So how can you transform your own lives? How can you put your skills that you learn in Toastmasters to real world applications? I realized that, and this is the last anecdote, and since I was asked to speak about my journey, I just picked 4 or 5 out of thousands of anecdotes. But the last anecdote is about the World Championship of Public Speaking itself. How can I not talk about that? So, in 2000 in 2014, when I competed in my first World Championship of Public Speaking in Kuala Lumpur, I got the runner-up at the semi-finals. But I learned so much that year, and I came back home to Bombay, to Mumbai. I landed from Kuala Lumpur to Mumbai, and the first thing I wanted to do was not even check my office mail, so was not even to text my friends or family that I'm back. I took a paper and pencil and started thinking what should be my speech next year. And the reason I was so passionate about that is because I had learned so much in Kuala Lumpur from the past world champions, from watching Dhananjay, my good friend, win, watching education sessions, that I wanted to put it in practice. There were a lot of friends of mine, well-wishers, who told me, Aditya, you won the district contest. You went to the semi-finals and you're in the top 18 in the world, top 27 in the world. Please don't compete the next year. What if you lose in the club contest? What if you lose in the area contest? People are going to call you a one-time wonder. You don't want that. But then I asked them, I have so much I've learned. I'm sure in a few years I'll forget half of it. How do I put it into practice? So I competed the next year because I wanted to put those learnings to practice. And they were wrong. I didn't lose in the club or area contest. And even if I had lost, it wouldn't have mattered because my fire was to put these learnings to practice, to test and experiment what I had learned. And next year, voila, I did win the semifinals. I went to the finals at the beautiful Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, and I won world number 2. Now people said, Aditya, now obviously you got to stop contesting because you have only one place to move ahead. You either the winner or anything else is same or worse. But I said, no, where will I put the new learnings to practice? So I came back in 2017, went all the way to Vancouver, went to the finals, but this time I didn't place. But to me, I didn't feel upset at all. You can ask people who were there. That's because for me, it was all about a platform to put things in practice. So to conclude, I've learned that when you approach any activity with a question of what can I learn from this, there is so much more excitement that just winning or losing becomes very passe. It becomes a little boring. It's like average people want to win and lose. Legends want to learn. You feel that excitement. If you want to win and lose, hey, come on, you're average. If you want to learn from the experience, you are a legend. But you can feel that excitement about learning only if you are in a field which comes naturally to you, which elicits that natural childlike excitement in you. If I were to do the same thing in the World Championship of Guitar competitions or World Championship of Acoustics, I probably would be very, very bored because that does not come naturally to me. So it may not be public speaking for you. Just because you're in Toastmasters, it doesn't need to be public speaking for you. But whatever is your theater of action, as Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam would call it, the theater of action you want to play in, choose that, have a learning mindset, and ask yourself, are you becoming a better person? Because if you become a better person, a better leader in you is a natural byproduct. Let me pause now. I can keep going till kingdom come, but I want to pause and spend the next 20, 25 minutes or so that we have on questions and answers. And feel free to ask me questions from across dimensions. I'm okay to take anything. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you so much, Aditya. Before we have the question and answers, can we have a wonderful or a thunderous round of applause? Well, Aditya, I hope you can hear the thunder all the way from India, though we're all in Zoom. All right. So moving on to the question and answers, I'd like to start with this, Aditya. So there is one misconception, or rather, I don't know if it's true or not. A lot of us find that leadership in Toastmasters is very different from leadership, say, in the corporate world. So how do you really, strike a balance between the two, and what difference do you see between both these worlds, and as a leader?
Well, the primary difference, which is pretty obvious, is influencing with and without authority, isn't it? So in Toastmasters, you need to you need to you need to influence even though the other person has no obligation to listen to you. In organizations, you need to influence, but there is a natural motivation on the other side because of their bonus that they need to get, or their incentives, or their ESOPs, or just their salary. So there is a bonus in my organization for me to behave well and go to office every day. There is no bonus for me to be a good executive committee member under my president unless I feel like being one. In leadership research in the organization that I was part of, we talk about this word called discretionary energy, which says that as a leader, your primary job is to create conditions where your team is able to unleash energy out of their own discretion. They make a choice that they want to do something. And you can never make them do that, but you can create conditions where the team wants to do something on their own. That's how movements are created, isn't it? A Black Lives Matters movement cannot be orchestrated saying in 2020 April we're going to start a movement. No, movements just happen. It's like you never know which TikTok video is going to go viral. You make 100 videos, one video goes viral, it becomes a big movement. Similarly, movements start like that. Black Lives Matters cannot be orchestrated. It just happens when the conditions are right and ripe. Similarly, if you want to create a movement for your own club, if you want to have a war cry and make Toastmasters permeate through your organization, as a leader, you create conditions that facilitates the eager want in people, where people feel self-directed. And I'm to end this. I'm reminded of an article that I read in The Economist, which is one magazine which I still continue to read. I've stopped reading most of it though. Uh, and this was an old article, probably 4 years ago, where uh, an employee, a staff member of the White House, had just retired after serving six presidents or five presidents, right from the Reagan era to the Bush Senior to Bill Clinton to Bush Junior to President Obama and then Trump. And she retired 3 years ago. And she said, she was asked, what's the difference between each of these bosses that you had, the President of the United States? She said, when I entered when I entered a meeting with Obama, I would come out of the meeting thinking that I am the president of the United States. I feel powerful enough to take the decision. And she said, each time I enter a meeting with Trump, I come out having reaffirmed that he is the president of the United States, that I'm doing it for him, right? Now, this is not about who is better, Trump or Obama. That's different. This is about that subtle feeling that that leader left in her, and that's more important in Toastmasters because the member can just stop doing things if they don't feel self-directed. So that's the main difference between leadership at Toastmasters and organizations.
Right. Thank you, Aditya. Now, we often come across this saying a good leader is a good reader. Would you like to share some tips to members from your experience and how reading has helped you enhance your leadership journey?
Yeah, so I'm going to say something very controversial here. So forgive me in advance, all of you, all 140 of you. Well, reading is very important, of course, but reading alone doesn't deliver. Wisdom comprises of three parts. In Sanskrit, it's called Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasana. In English, it's knowing, understanding, and then becoming, right? So, of course, unless you know, you can't understand. You can only understand what you gather as knowledge, as information, and you can only become what you have understood. So, in that sense, knowledge is important. But a lot of us spend too much of time, money, and effort in just gathering knowledge. I had a friend called Rob here who invited me to his house to show off his collection of self help books. He said, Aditya, I've reached 250. I said, what 250? He said, I bought 250 self help books. So he said, I'm a better leader. No, it doesn't work that way, isn't it? Because how much of that 250 has translated to understanding? You probably need one book for that all your life. That's enough. But the more you've extracted out of that knowledge your own independent conviction on the subject, which is called understanding, then how much of that has permeated your own personality, the cracks and that resistance that I was talking about, and offered change inside out in you, then it delivers as a better leader. You see, if you really have to be calm in the face of a storm as a leader, in the pandemic, in the COVID-19 crisis, knowing you should knowing you should be calm is not important because you can't be calm if that's your personality. Being calm is important, not knowing that you should be calm, isn't it? Like knowing that you should not get angry is fine, but it doesn't deliver. Not getting angry is what delivers. So the first step, of course, is reading, watching videos, watching TED Talks, or watching books, reading books. But then it's a personal journey where it translates to how much you understand and how much you've become. I want to close by what Robert Lind says in his beautiful passage called Armchair Critics. He says, to become wise by reading a book or listening to a voice is at once the most exciting and enticing of dreams. In such a dream, I took down the famous philosopher Epictetus, but lo behold, it was only a dream. So we can read a lot, but unless it is translated to observable behavior, it doesn't deliver in terms of our everyday happiness and our leadership skill. That's my opinion.
All right. Thank you so much, Aditya. Now, you just mentioned you spoke about people watching TEDx talks. For some of us who might not know, Aditya himself is a TEDx speaker, and he's spoken at two TED events. So, Aditya, again, because we're talking about beyond Toastmasters, how do you think your journey from Toastmasters to a TEDx speaker? What are the learnings that you would like to share with us?
Right. So, firstly, I'm not too proud of my TED speeches. Meaning, my first TED talk, first TEDx talks was in 2011. It was in Chennai. My second TEDx speak was in Qatar in the Middle East in 2018. Um, uh, some of the best speeches I've delivered are outside of the TEDx realm or even outside of Toastmasters, probably at work and probably with some clients. That's where I'm fully myself. But my TEDx journey was interesting. And there's always this question in Toastmasters saying, and I had this question too, which I've told some of you in my previous talks. I was talking to somebody during the pandemic crisis, and that guy in London, my friend here, he felt he's a Toastmaster too. So he was feeling really down and depressed. He was living alone. He had nobody to speak to, and he was really down and depressed because of the isolation, social distancing. And I asked him, "What are you doing to keep your head above water, to keep yourself afloat?" He said, "Aditya, I'm just watching some videos to motivate me." I said, "Oh, what videos are you watching?" He said, "I'm watching, this motivational speaker, or I'm watching this, religious speaker. I'm watching this TED talk." Then I was wondering, he's been a Toastmaster for 5 years. When people are really down and depressed, why do they not pick up a world championship of public speaking speech or a Toastmaster inspirational speech and get motivated by them? Why do they s- then kid or humor Toastmaster saying, "Huh, that's for normal times when we're just evaluating." But real times require real speeches, as if Toastmaster speeches are unreal or fake. That really triggered a thought in myself, asking, how do we ensure that we, with 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 15,000 clubs around the world meeting at least once a month, we add 15,000 inspirational speeches every month, but still people go to TED speeches or other speeches to draw inspiration. Why can't we be the people who who offer inspiration when people need it most? So that's what I learned personally when I gave my TEDx speeches. Not so much about the output of my own speech, but about the process of learning. Saying it's not about having that perfect body language or ahs and ums. It's about putting your audience first, starting from the question, what do I want them to think differently or feel differently or do differently or say differently as a result of my speech? And that alone is my guiding light. And everything else is just tools and memes to help me connect to that purpose. So that's the TEDx journey.
All right, thank you, Aditya. Now, we come across situations where in leadership we want to take hard calls, but then we are forced to be considerate and think about people, think about what's going to happen. So, what is your take on emotional leadership in Toastmasters and outside?
Can you repeat the first sentence again?
Yeah, I said we often have to take hard calls. And then when we are about to take a decision that might affect someone's life, say, for example, in the COVID-19 crisis, a lot of companies might have to go ahead and take the decision of laying off employees. And then there's this huge debate going on about, are these the right ethics? Is this what those are the people who worked for you during the toughest times and brought all the glory? So, what is your take on emotional leadership and these concepts?
Yeah, there's this famous verse in Sanskrit which says Satyam Bruyat, Priyam Bruyat, Na Bruyat Satyam Apriyam. It says two things are important in communication. One is Satyam, which is truth. Number two is Priyam, which is love. It's beautiful, isn't it? So the sloka continues, but it means don't 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 exercise loving words if it's not the truth. Don't exercise the truth if it's going to be pricking the other people like a needle. Both are important, but not at the expense of each other. So if you were to speak with love, speak the truth. If you were to speak the truth, speak with love. Just like an example of what I mentioned of that White House example. Great leaders are those who are able to convey even hard messages in a way that that is compassion, right? Empathy is sometimes difficult because you can't put yourself in the shoes of the person you are firing. That'll be fake if you try to say that you have empathy. But compassion is important. Compassion is understanding that how can I be of help though I have to take this decision. But having said all of this, in your question of tough calls during the pandemic, I believe that the work needs to be done in good times to be able to take a decision in bad times. Uh, Organizations, if they have a stronger purpose, if they have defined their values that they're going to live by in good times, then those values and purpose helps the organizations to take the right decisions in bad times. Now, if the organization has a very loose purpose and no real values defined, then they are like Alice in Wonderland, isn't it? Any path is a good path. That famous example in Alice in Wonderland, where Alice meets a fork in the road and she doesn't know which direction to take. And she sees the cat on top of the tree, and the cat says, Alice, I'll tell you which way to go if you tell me where you want to reach. Alice tells the cat, Cat, I don't know where I want to reach. The cat tells Alice, Alice, then it doesn't matter which path you take. So it doesn't matter whether you fire 100 people or don't fire 100 people if you don't even know what kind of an organization you are. What is your DNA? What do you want to stand for? Like if you think of the Tata group, you think of credibility and honesty. If you think of Google, you think of innovation. You think of Tesla, you think of something. You think of Volvo, you think of safety and sturdiness. What does your organization want to stand for in terms of culture and values? But that needs to be defined in the good times for it to come to help in the bad times. Just like you need to go to the gym when you're feeling good, because when you have a fever, you anyway can't go to the gym. so, so that's my take on leadership in tough times.
All right, thank you, Aditya. Now, I'm not sure if the word advice is right here, but I'm reading the question verbatim. What is your advice to young adults in the workforce and in the hustle culture?
See, I would only say that I'll take a larger stance on things and say that I'm going to be very provocative. Provocative only because, you know, uh, I'm not going to meet you in person after saying this. I'm in London. Uh, so all all of mind's distress is because of our own ego. But that's very provocative because at the at the sight of it, it seems like it's the world that provocates us. At the intuitively, it feels that provocation comes from outside. But Buddha says something interesting. Buddha says there are two arrows that pierce us all the time. Arrow number one is is objective suffering, which is suffering that happens for everybody, which means the pandemic and COVID-19 is something that's true for all of us, isn't it? Suffering, the arrow two, he says, is the suffering that your mind interprets, which means for one person, there's a greater sense of isolation and depression because of COVID-19. For another person, there is a lesser sense of isolation and he can go on for 6 months. The first person can't do it more than 15 days. So Buddha says the second arrow is the arrow of ego. That's the arrow of your own personality, isn't it? How you interpret situations. All of philosophy and spirituality and meditation, all of that tries to work on the second arrow. It says if you remove the second arrow, there is no suffering left. Still, the first arrow may be true. You may still have a famine or an accident or COVID-19, but your mind doesn't interpret that as suffering. So for young people in the workforce, there is so much more stimulus today that activates our ego, that puts us in the center of the universe, thinking my boss is why should this happen to me, or it's because of my boss that my life is average. No, it's because of your own second arrow that your life is average. Changing our perspectives on life changes our experience on life. At the same time, you take appropriate action. You don't become stagnant, but Your joy and your happiness is in your hands. Once you take ownership of that, career is a beautiful journey. Everything is a beautiful journey after that. That would be my advice if you put it that way.
Right, thank you. Now, Aditya, you did speak about Swadharma and how this decision that you take when you had a lucrative job offer after ISB, but you chose to follow what you wanted to do. Now, how do you think, or what would you like to share on how one can go about choosing or finding their path or finding their center or their Swadharma?
Yeah, it's probably the $1 million question. So, uh, as a consultant, I must say that um, advice is my job. Implementation, I do it for money. No, I'm just joking. Then how do you do that? I think first step is to listen. Listen not to others, but listen to what times of the day or what activities in a week uh, excites you the most. So some of you, it could just be your work itself. That's fantastic. Uh, but if you find that something else excites you most, ask yourself how much time, percentage of time am I spending on that? Most probably it will be very less. And ask yourself, how do you expand that to fill up as much time? It need not become your profession, but you want to cultivate more of it in your life, in your weekends, in your evenings, in your mornings, in your spare time, free time. Switch your hobbies to make it speak to your swadharma. Over time, then you will come to a stage where you take a call. Is there a profession available where I can make it full time or not? So much before I made this tough choice that you were talking about, I had already permeated my life with things that I'm passionate about. I was always passionate about philosophy. So even as an engineering student, I used to attend lectures on comparative religion, parallel mythology, philosophy of the West, philosophy of the East. I used to read so many books. So not because I consciously wanted to, because I just allowed my passion to permeate my life. Just permeate. It's like how philosophers define love, isn't it? For love to be true, love should permeate you and reach everything around you. You can't love a person, a tree. You are love and it can permeate. Similarly, if your passion is true, your passion will radiate around you in concentric circles and touch everything that 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 it meets. So I allowed my passion to permeate all around me, even when I was in my cognizant job or even when I was in college. But over time, you realize now that the passion has reduced and now you're more objective and matured about it. Then you start thinking, how can you integrate some of that with your own profession? And that's the journey I spoke about with the triangle and all of that. I'm sure you can strike the right balance where you integrate your passion with 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 your core work, which is your job.